So my name is Cameron, and this presentation is going to be on the value of literature. And I'm going to be looking off to the side a little bit. I have some notes, so if I'm glancing over there, I'm just looking at my notes. But if we're going to start off with arguing for the value of literature, we should understand just the simple definition of the word literature. And the definition is just any body or collection of written works. And that's the most broad definition of literature. It doesn't have to be inherently artistic or anything like a novel. It just has to be a collection of any written work. Um, so, because we're starting with the definition, we should also start with just the inception of literature, period. And we can actually pinpoint almost about an exact date on when we see the first written languages start to arise. And that was in about 3500 BC with the early Sumerian cultures. And the interesting thing about that is that we can see that the Sumerians were really the first civilization. They're maybe not civilization, but they were the first complex society. They were the ones that spawned everything else after it. They were the inception of complex human society. Uh, and very much on the same note, they also were the first people to have a written language. Those two things definitely coincided. There were other types of civilizations before the Sumerians, but they never made it as far because they didn't have a written language. Um, and the interesting thing about the written language of the Sumerians is that it served two main purposes. The main purposes were one, to tell stories, and two was to record economic transactions. Um, if you're looking at the human condition period, we like to tell stories, and we like to learn things from stories, and we like to reflect on ourselves. And that's exactly what these stories did. We see like the Epic of Gilgamesh, for example, was probably the most well-known story in the Sumerian civilization, and it taught a lot about the values that people lived by at that time: bravery, courage, humility, even. A lot of the main pillars of Sumerian society were present in that story, which definitely would lead to a more meaningful life if you have just a compass where you can find values. You're going to be able to lead a more meaningful life. Because it also was for economic transactions, this was trade at the time. Trade has been, or trade probably was one of the most, not probably, definitely was one of the most pivotal things into creating the human race as we see now. People grow their societies based off of trade and economic transactions, and we see written language being used very pragmatically to do those things. So it's not an exaggeration to say that a lot of the reason why human society is around, period, is just because of literature. Written language is one of the ingredients necessary to create humans as we see them now. Literature has always just been knowledge. The two equate. And on that same note, jumping forward a few thousand years, if we're using the definition of literature as just any written book of works or collection of written works, the college system in the entire world, the entire college system universally relies on textbooks and readings. Without those things, college doesn't exist. Without literature, college doesn't exist. If we don't have textbooks, we don't have school. And even though college can be looked at as just a phase in someone's life, it also is the actualization. It can be the actualization of someone's hopes and dreams and their desires. It's not required for everybody. There are some people that don't need to go to college to do what they really want to do in life. But for a lot of people, the path to fulfillment and doing what they want to do in life ultimately is going to college. It's going and getting their education so that they can go out into the world and they can accomplish the things that they want to accomplish. And that most certainly is a means to a meaning, or is a means to a meaningful life, I guess. If you're able to actualize your hopes and dreams and your desires to do what you want in the world, that is 100% correlated with living a more meaningful life. And it's only possible because we have literature, including things like textbooks and any other, literally any other written work that you would use in college, which is a lot, obviously. Um, Next, we can look at the works of Italo Calvino. He was an Italian writer, and in 1967, and excuse my pronunciation of the word, I don't speak Italian, but he wrote an essay, and it in Italian is Per chi si scrive, which translates to whom do we write for? And in this essay, he talks just a lot about literature, period, and the value that it has to the human condition. And one interesting point that he made was that literature is a vast collection of things, like definitionally, and in his definition of the word literature too. Um, it's everything written down, and with that just breadth of information, um, there is inherently going to be a highlight of inequalities that comes from that. If you have so many different kinds of literature and people writing literature, you're going to get a reflection of inequalities in any societal system. Um, and he mostly spoke of cultural inequalities, but literature period highlights not just cultural inequalities, but it highlights economic inequalities, political inequalities, gender inequalities. Literally every kind of inequality is going to be reflected in any kind of literature. Literature ultimately is just the reflection of the human experience, and the human experience is inherently unequal. Um, and what literature does is if you look at it with an analytical perspective, you can really see these inequalities and you can have them highlighted. The first step to fixing any inequality or any injustice is just the what's the word? Is the finding of it, I guess, for lack of better words. But you have to be able to diagnose the inequality before you can make any progress with trying to fix it. And what literature does is it gives us a really solid avenue to diagnose these inequalities and overall um, make a more fair and equal society, no matter what society it is, no matter what country or nation, it doesn't matter. Literature is one of the things that helps us diagnose inequalities in any society, in any civilization. Um, and the only way to fix them is to diagnose them at first, the very first step. Uh, and I think that definitely falls in line with both being a better person and living a more meaningful life. If we have a fair, free, and equal society, it's going to be conducive to both of those things. Um, if you have a society that's rigged or favors one group of people more than another, it's not going to be conducive to any one of those things. It's not going to help a certain group of the population become a better person, and it's not going to help a certain group of the population live a more meaningful life. Um, so that was just one of the things that Italo Calvino said, and once again, his 1967 essay titled Per chi si scrive. And finally, there was a book in 2009. It was published by the German publisher WVM. It stands for something German I'm not going to try to pronounce, but it was written by three authors, and once again, excuse my butchering of the pronunciation. It was Sabine Baumbach, Herbert Graves, and Ansgar Nuning. And the title of the book was Values in Literature and the Value of Literature. And what they did is they really highlighted two main benefits to literature, period. And the first one is that I kind of touched on it earlier in the presentation, but the first thing is that literature is a means of reflecting on the human condition. Like I stated earlier, literature is a reflection of the author, and the author is a human at the end of the day. And their human experience is going to relate to a lot of other people's experiences. One of the most fundamental pieces of being a human being is growth. Growth is vital to living a fulfilling life. Um, if you stay the same person your entire life, you're not going to find any fulfillment in that. You need to grow to be able to feel like you accomplished anything. And one of the avenues in which we grow is self-reflection, is reflection. If we're able to I mean, like with the cultural inequality or inequality issue, the very first step we need to take to solve a problem is to diagnose the problem. If we don't know what the problem is, there's no use in trying to fix it because we don't know what it is. Um, when you're analyzing your character and the steps that you need to make to become a better person, you need to do some reflection. And literature is one of those ways that people can reflect uh, and find areas of growth in their own personal lives, in which definitely makes them a better person because they're growing. They're becoming a better version, I guess, of the version of themselves that came beforehand. And when, like I said earlier, because growth is just one of the fundamental pieces of being human, it's fulfilling. It's very meaningful when you're able to make some tangible growth and you're able to observe that and witness that. Humans take a lot of satisfaction in that. And the second value that they said existed in literature was that literature, because it's a reflection of people and society in general, literature reinforces morals, ethics, and norms that we live by day to day. Um, Obviously, the vast majority of people are born with a moral compass. They know what's right and what's wrong. But unless you have a larger, I don't want to say institution because that's not the right word, but unless you have a larger body, I guess, a society that's able to reinforce these norms, um, they're not going to be fully instilled into the individual. You have to have a system that is able to foster and grow these norms and morals and uh, codes that we live by every single day that overall, in the end, hopefully, create a better society. When we have literature that, once again, is a reflection of the human condition, reinforcing these positive morals and norms, we're able to just become a more morally cognizant person. And with that, you become a better person. So all in all, there's really a lot of different value. There's a lot of different values in learning literature. I mean, pragmatically, we can see that it was just one of the foundational steps in the human race becoming the human race we know now. Without literature, we don't. We're probably hunter and gather. We're probably hunting and gathering still. Um, we don't have complex societies like we have now. It doesn't happen without literature. Um, it can help fulfill. It can be a source of fulfillment. Is a step towards fulfillment, like what we see in college. Um, Literature is pivotal to the college experience and education period, and that's what a lot of people find their value in. It's it helps highlight cultural inequalities so that we can better fix them. Um, it's a reflection of the human condition that helps us grow personally, and it reinforces the morals and norms that we need to live by every single day in order to become a good person. So that's my presentation on the value of literature.